And what is happening, everyone? Welcome on into the Check Your Brain podcast. My name is Tony Mazur. Thank you for listening to this podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And thank you for watching this over on my Rumble page, as well as my Twitter or X page at Tony Mazur, TonyMazur. If you want extra content from me, go over to Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur. Again, that's TonyMazur. You can subscribe for free. I'm not going to give you a lot of episodes, but you can subscribe and get most episodes for as little as $3 or $5, and you get extra podcasts plus video in the $10 tier. Well, enough about me, enough about my plugs. Let's talk about somebody who deserves your follow. And I've seen his follower count grow, and deservedly so. He's not grifting. He's not being some kind of left wing or right wing influencer, or uh, he's not showing his abs, or he's not showing any of that. He's actually doing the genuine boots on the ground work, and that is frequent guest to the podcast. Now, I think you have eclipsed a couple of my podcast guests, including now Vice President J.D. Vance, who was on a couple of times, and that is David Chapman. And David, he had a book out that was called The Forgotten Nine, that was released about a year ago, about 9 players that should be in the Hall of Fame from the dead ball era. But we're not talking baseball today. We are talking about politics as sports. So, David, thank you for being on the show, and welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
So, something happened last week. There was I guess, an election, and it went the way of the guy and not the woman. I guess that's what I'm hearing. I I do want to bring this up because I had you on the podcast. We talked about the book that you had almost a couple of years ago now.
Yeah.
And we talked about the book, and then we did a separate episode on my Patreon where we talked politics.
Right.
And what was interesting was we were discussing the Trump momentum or lack thereof. It seemed like this was Ron DeSantis time, the Christina Pushaws and the John, what's his name, John Cardillo, and a lot of the DeSantis. They call him the DeSimps every day. I like Ron DeSantis. I think he's done an
He's a
excellent
great
job for
governor.
Florida. He's a great governor, but the presidential campaign was trying to take on the personality of Donald Trump without Donald Trump, and it just doesn't work that way. We're sports fans. We know that you can't take the image of a team and just recreate it in a different market. It just doesn't happen that way. It has to be authentic. And you were the one at the time that said, no, I think Donald Trump still has the momentum in this race, which was at that point about a year and a half, almost 2 years prior to the 2024 election. And since then, from the indictments to the E. Jean Carroll situation to the culminating with the debates and the incident in Butler, Pennsylvania on July 13th, you called this a couple of years ago. What was, in your way, your prognostication? How did you put this all together? How did you see this, and what factors led you to believe that, as a lot of people on the right were starting to look at in other directions?
So I did a pure historical analysis, and I did this back in 2020, and a lot of people will remember the long thread that I did that made my count big to begin with, but I missed. And I missed what I called the stolen election trend. And so I went back and I was reading all of these books and trying to figure out where I missed. And if you go back, you'll find that people similar to Trump, disruptors, anti-establishment guys like Andrew Jackson, William Jennings Bryan, Grover Cleveland, Richard Nixon, all had one election within question or, stolen from them. And they also had something else in common. They were all their party's nominee 3 times. And that led me then to start looking at, okay, this is 2021 when I'm looking at this. I'm like, okay, what else does Trump have in common with Grover Cleveland? Well, I mean, apparently a whole host of things, from the same weight to his wife being the exact same Delta gap to everything. And then, so how do you then compare a time to a time? You can't just say, oh, well, Lincoln and JFK, their assassinations are similar, therefore it's going to happen again. What I did is I went back 20 years prior to Cleveland to compare the current, that time's political environment, to see if what led up to the power of Cleveland also was comparable to what led up to the power of Donald Trump in 2016. And what I found is that 10 years prior to Cleveland, they had what was called the Long Depression, which was the worst depression until the Great Depression. Well, about 8 years prior to Donald Trump, we had what was called the Great Recession, which was the worst since the Great Depression. So, leading up to both of these guys' reigns of power, the first time there was this economic upheaval and decline among the working class, where they all were worrying about, okay, we're not doing better than our parents were. We worry about our future and the decline. There was a lot of worry about jobs and everything. And essentially the same economic disaster was being unfolded. And in 1884, the same switch, they call them the mugwumps, they were a hardcore Republican base. They switched to Grover Cleveland, which happened in 2016, where the working class switched to Trump. And then once they were in office, they were both anti-establishment. Cleveland even used the term "drain the swamp," and it was this essential. They hated Cleveland. They used the mirage to convince people of he's creating chaos, when actually they're responding to the chaos. The establishment was responding to the chaos by convincing the voters that it was chaos, when actually Cleveland was just trying to fix things. And they did the same thing to Trump, where Trump's trying to fix it, but then the investigations were the chaos, but the investigations were the retaliation to the attacking of the swamp. And they got what was called the seasick voter, where people were like, I've had enough of this chaos. We've got to get them out. And then there was also accusations during Cleveland's era of stolen elections in Indiana and in New York, where we know the story in 2020. So then you can then go forward, and then from the time they were out of power, they both fought for election reform. So really, we're just right back here. So by the time I did all of that research, I'm like, bro, this is happening. This is happening. Like, it is just way too similar. It's way too alike that there's no way it's not happening.
So you put all that work in, because I think a lot of people, they're not what they call the political junkies. So you kind of just look at what's available right in front of them, surface level stuff. And it just seemed to me that during this election cycle, and I throw 2020 out, as you said, it is the stolen election feeling of, it had to be a perfect storm of the COVID stuff, to the mail-in ballots, to the summer of George, to everything else that was going on in 2020, all the shenanigans. And all of a sudden, that guy got 81 million, when the barometer is usually around 65 for a Democrat. Very strange how that happened. But anyways, I was told there's only one election you're not allowed to criticize and critique. But when you start to look at what happened in the breakdown of the demographics and what they went for, and how the Trump campaign appealed to those, really truly exploited those demographics in a way that was way more focused than I even expected. I think 2016 was kind of the middle finger to the establishment, and a lot of people felt that the regime, from the bailouts, from the recession and everything, that they did not look after the average American. 2020 was obviously very different, but by 2024, I was concerned that Trump's getting a little bit older. He's had a couple of people that were not giving him the best advice in the past. And it seemed that they turned it around. He started going on podcasts. He was on Joe Rogan, obviously, recently, and Theo Vaughn and Andrew Schultz and a couple of other areas that Kamala Harris, and we'll talk more about her in a little bit in that campaign, but she can't do a 3-hour interview. She can't do an 18-minute friendly interview on 60 Minutes without massive edits and makeup and everything like that. And Trump was built for this moment, and it seemed to be resonating with younger generations, especially of men.
Yeah, the podcasts were amazing. That was their demographic. I think in many ways they knew exactly what they were doing. He's perfect. He like Joe Rogan said, he just keeps going and going and going. And he's just perfect for a podcast, where Harris is he was just such a terrible candidate. But but their outreach in many ways, you also had a lot of independent people like Scott Pressler and 10X Votes in Michigan, and down in Arizona, you had Charlie Kirk. None of them were actually a part of the campaign, but they were all in for Trump.
Adjacent, yes.
Yeah, and they knew what their job was, and they knew what they had to do, and they did it so well. And they got those low propensity or no propensity voters out that Trump needed to get out, and it made the difference. He won Pennsylvania by 2 points, which was the largest margin of any Republican since Reagan. I mean, that's not a close election in Pennsylvania. So I mean, yeah, it wasn't just Trump. It was, and Trump. Listen, Trump, I think, was a candidate of destiny. He made a lot of this happen. He survived the assassination attempt. He survived the convictions. He survived the 4 years of people giving up on him. But then everybody else who, like I said, was all in on him, they had their roles too. And it was a way that it was like this concerted effort that nobody realized what was happening until it happened on Tuesday night.
It was honestly, I was thinking about this back in 2004, and I was in high school in 2004 during the Kerry Bush election. And I recall distinctly and I thought about this the other day as well, but going into it, there were people going, there's the possibility John Kerry's the president. And there's a whole thing about when Kerry was getting a massage, and I forgot who it was who walks in and says, I want to be the first to congratulate you as Mr. President. And it's like, wow, John Kerry's going to win. And it really wasn't that close. Especially wartime and what they were dealing with during the mid-aughts at that time. But it's interesting when you think about what it was like on election day 2024, and that there were people, many of them on our side of the political spectrum, said this could be close. This could take days. This could take months. Forget 2000. This could take a while because of what we saw with the brat summer and the joy and the vibes and everything. And it turned out to be a bloodbath. Yes, I'm going to use that term, bloodbath, and it was a landslide, convincing victory for Donald Trump. And you were pointing out why. How did it get to this point? And is it a way of how the left was kind of believing their own press releases, smelling their own farts, figuratively speaking, maybe sometimes literally, depends. Was this them thinking there is no way that they're going to vote for this 34-time convicted felon, this rapist, this, and this, and this? And it turns out that they just needed to go outside and touch grass and actually talk to everyday Americans? Or like, what was this? Or were they trying to convince themselves that this is the greatest campaign ever? It's flawless, as Joy Reid said. It's a perfect, flawless campaign. What do you think was the lead up and going into this with the left? Their reactions to all of this, especially the delicious meltdowns that we've seen on TikTok this week.
So leading into the election, I tweeted, there's only really 2 elections that I could think of where the polls were all over the place, from Harris +3 in Iowa to Trump +1 million, Trump +1, Harris +1. And I thought of Obama in 2012 and Reagan 1980, where there's no clear winner and then one person just blows them out. But to your question, I think there's 2 circles, and they thought differently. I think the campaign always knew they were down, because as you hear them, what they're saying now, David Plouffe said, we just had too big of a hole that we had to dig out of, right? On the other hand, though, I think the media, I think their supporters and the people outside of the campaign believed it was really that close, and that there could have been anybody's game, right? But I don't know. I don't think that it was ever that close. I think with the economy the way it was, with immigration the way it was, with inflation the way it was, and how big of a lead Trump had on those issues in the polling, that I don't think it was ever going to be a nail biter, because he overwhelmingly was trusted on those issues. His approval rating was higher than it's ever been. She was the most unpopular vice president in history, though we pretend that she suddenly wasn't. And then I just don't think that it was that close. I think there was a lot of people who were fooling themselves into thinking it was. And even people on our side believed that it was that close. I think that in some parts, the Democrats wanted us to believe it so they could get more turnout, so it wasn't a Joe Biden blowout. You know,
Here's my going theory. I guess I'm still working on this, but this is what I believe. Joe Biden, they noticed that you get to the State of the Union this past year, and when Joe Scarborough's like, this is the best we're going to see of Joe Biden, this is excellent. Yeah, you watched 15 minutes of the debate when he's hopped up on this cocktail of Adderall, cocaine, God only knows what they shot in his system. And he's like, and then about 15, 20 minutes later, it's, the rich need to pay their fair share.
yeah,
And he's whispering, and he's just really just he's so wound up, and that wore off pretty quick. And I think they realized, I don't think he has the stamina not only to do just another 4 years, another 4 months in office. So they schedule this debate in June. There's no debates. It's usually at the end of September. You get the first round of presidential debates, the vice presidential debate, then you get a second one, and it's on a different network. Instead, they do it in late June. Biden embarrasses himself on TV. And for the next couple of weeks, they kept saying, like, oh, I don't know what's going on with this guy. What's happening? And I think it laid the precedent that they could very well replace him in the fourth quarter. But there was that incident that happened in July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania, where if he didn't turn his head to the side of and look at the screen, we're probably looking at Joe Biden beating Nikki Haley in this election this year. They wouldn't have replaced Joe Biden. They tried to pretend there was some happy talk with the Biden campaign, but I very well think if Trump didn't look at the immigration stats on that board, it's Joe Biden beats Nikki Haley in a fairly close race this time around. When that didn't happen, when Trump pumped his fist with the blood on his ear, even though half the country thinks it was fake, and he's pumping his fists and yelling, fight, 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 I think the left knew that that was over. It was over for them after that. They had to replace as a Hail Mary to get Kamala Harris in there. And then that way, if she wins, that's great. It's a Hollywood story. Jeffrey Katzenberg runs her campaign. But if she doesn't, then you can just accuse half the country of being racist, sexist Nazis, and which is going on as we speak right now. So that's my theory. I think after the assassination attempt and that he recovered from it and spoke at the RNC a couple of days later with the bandage on his ear, I think after that, they knew they were toast. And it kind of shows it because they're now $20 million in debt.
Yeah, I kept saying over and over the bullet missed, and now they're out of ammo. And yeah, in this time of economic turmoil, wars overseas, people struggling, and they're looking for leadership, and they see Biden up there. But then they see this guy, Trump, who spits a bullet out and pumps his fists. We're looking for leadership. It's right there. You know, I think that's exactly what they saw. It's really hard to look away when that guy's ready to lead. And there's no, in a time of stress, people show who they really are. And Trump showed who he really was when he took a bullet that day. So I think that's 100% true. I don't see how it didn't end that day. And we saw the turnout in Western Pennsylvania. They came out for him.
Oh yeah, and I was at the rally last week in Pittsburgh when Megyn Kelly spoke and Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Mike Pompeo.
It's kind of significant that Kelly is now supporting him.
Yes. Yeah, and it got a lot of support. Actually, that's what I want to bring up now is the support he was getting from unconventional forms. While they were trying to brat Summer, Dick, and Liz Cheney on it, which all it did is that we have a political realignment that's going on that we probably haven't seen since around the fall of the Soviet Union, when you saw the neocons, the Charles Krauthammers of the world split from the Pat Buchanans of the world. And you were seeing a lot of that transition go throughout the 1990s. We are seeing this now. How am I on the same? How is Taylor Swift and Dick Cheney supporting the same candidate, whereas I'm on the side of a Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard and Joe Rogan and Elon Musk? These are not tried and true rock-ribbed conservatives. These are people who said, the way things are going now, my political and my social ideology aligns more with this guy. He's not the Hitler that you kept saying he was 8 years ago. He's not this existential threat to democracy, which means bureaucracy, but that's a different story. And I think there's a weird political realignment that libertarians did not vote for Chase Oliver, that the Green Party people really did not come out for Jill Stein or Cornel West or whoever was on the ballot. I think people looked at Trump and said, guys, he's a proven commodity. We know what we're going to get out of him. He's not a far right fascist. He's a 90s Democrat. That's what he was. And that's just the way the political realignment. How do you look at what is going on with this movement now?
Well, so the Democrats have always been the party of war, except for when the Bushes were the head of the Republican Party.
Cindy Sheehan, yeah.
Yeah. So now that it took a while, but now that we're a little bit further away from Obama and now we're firmly into the Trump era, and that as a way of opposing Trump's no wars, they have to now become war again. Yeah, it's that, and it is amazing that RFK is now a Republican, and that Tulsi Gabbard, who once endorsed Bernie Sanders, is now a Republican because she opposes wars and she opposes censorship and she opposes weaponization of the justice system and vaccine mandates. And that's a huge thing. The vaccine mandates and what we put into our food has got Kennedy endorsing a Trump, because the bureaucracy has gone way to the left of what anybody has ever wanted. And yes, Trump is essentially a 90s Democrat. Bill Clinton was incredibly popular, though. And in fact, he was the only person to ever balance the budget, and he was a Democrat.
But by today's standards, he's considered a moderate Republican.
Well, I mean, listen to him out on the campaign trail, both in 2016 and in 2024. They had to keep pulling him off the trail because he kept sounding like Trump on immigration, on healthcare. He was out there. What did he say? He was like, if they would have properly vetted the immigrants, the lady wouldn't have died. And then he was off the trail because you're not supposed to say that, Bill. But he can't help it. He's too common sense.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that political realignment as well is the Trump side, the MAGA side, accepts the flaws or accepts shortcomings in ideology, whereas the left does not. You have to check every single box or you're out. Oh, you can't be pro Second Amendment and on the left anymore. You can't be school choice or essentially being a Christian. You can't be a Christian on the left right now because, then that means you support all the tenets of the church and priests and this and this and this and this and trans rights. You can't say, guys, I am in favor of transgender rights and gay rights and everything. I don't think that we should have drag queens wearing fishnets and tassels reading gay pornography to children in schools. You bigot, and you're thrown out of the party. Whereas on the right, Donald Trump has said it a number of times on the campaign trail. I like what Bobby's doing when he's promoting health and against seed oils. I just want to keep him away from the oil. That's what's great about it. Yeah, okay, we all have different ideas of how we want to achieve this. We're all coming from this different, I hate using the Avengers term or like a superhero, but it really does seem like everybody's kind of putting their powers together for this movement, as opposed to you need to check every one of these boxes or else you're Hitler.
Well, it was like, and I think Trump said it with Kennedy, Trump's like, I know nothing about what he wants to do. He's like, I want to do it, but I don't know anything about it. So it's better that he does it. So you got to not only do you want to do the things that everybody wants? Sometimes it means bringing in a Tulsi or an RFK because they may not agree with you on healthcare or the oil, but they're experts on those other issues too that can expand your coalition. I mean, this is no longer a white working class thing. This is a working class. It's everybody who, it didn't matter what you look like. If you were working class, you voted for Donald Trump. Across the country, from every state, from Illinois to New Jersey to Ohio to Florida, everywhere. You voted for Donald Trump if you were working class. The Republican Party now is the most diverse coalition, no longer the Democrats.
It's and yeah, and like you said, the demographic changes of all of this, that it turned into a class conflict and not race. That you're seeing working class people, and now it's that bell curve. Tom Woods actually posted it the other day, because there's this ongoing belief that it's all the high IQ people voted for Harris and the low IQ voted for Trump. That's not the case. It's the midwits who voted for Harris. It's the 110 to 125 IQ, whereas the bell curve meme of you get the simpleton and you get the scholar, they both voted for Donald Trump. It's very, very interesting. Now we're at the phase of cope on the left, because you had 2020, Biden gets 81 million votes. Looking back for them, they may as well have just let Trump win, and then the pendulum could possibly swing back to the left and they get their ducks in order for 2024. Instead, not only do you have Donald Trump as president for 4 years, you have J.D. Vance, who has been fantastic and could very well be that heir apparent in the MAGA movement. You have a very good bench with Vivek, with Tulsi Gabbard, with other really young up-and-comers that are in the GOP. You have the House, you have the Senate, and you also have a probably retiring Clarence Thomas, 70-something years old, Alito, late 60s. Very well, they could retire. Donald Trump appoints a new, not dealing with the filibuster situation, that you can appoint a much younger candidate and be on the Supreme Court for a number of years. And possibly, who knows, maybe Sonia Sotomayor isn't doing as well, and you have a 7-2 court. So they kind of are in this cope phase, and they're starting to blame what the left is trying to figure out what it is that they can come back to. So here's Brian Stelter. This is a thing from the New Republic. He says, it wasn't the economy. It wasn't inflation or anything else. It was how people perceive those things, which points to one overpowering answer: the right-wing media. So it's the right-wing media's fault as to why Trump ended up winning. Then here, this is from MSNBC. John Heilman was on Bill Maher's show, and I thought this was fascinating. And I wanted to play this because for the people who claim to be the culture warriors on the left, boy, did they really not read the tea leaves, or at least they refused, and they want to keep this facade of, no, we're in the vein of Walter Cronkite, and we're real news, not where Twitter and Joe Rogan are. Let me play this really quick, and then we'll comment on it from Bill Maher's show over the weekend.
Not only is Twitter not a real place, but it's become a toxic cesspool filled with nothing, not about right, it's not about conservative, it's just filled with misinformation, disinformation, and conspiracy theories. So I would rather not have the left replicate that if that's what's required. I think the deeper question that the question's getting at is that if you look at the data in this election, the amount of reach of all of these alternative, I'm talking about the whole podcast space mostly, but also social media, the interviews that Trump did, not starting with Rogan, but Theo Vaughn and all of these other things he did, incredible reach compared to old mainstream media, right? Where, the number of people that Kamala Harris reached by going and talk to Brett Baer is a tiny fraction of, if you look at the average, not just the number of downloads, but then the social media plays on YouTube and other places that Trump did by hitting all of those mostly bro-friendly, skewing young male podcast platforms. I think the issue is not so much that the left, quote, needs a platform. There are a bunch of people on, Harris went on Call Her Daddy, right? All the Smoke, a few of those things. What the left has to, what Democrats have to figure out is the fact that the way to talk to voters who are not our age, and the large swelling number of the segment of young voters and middle-aged voters, is that they have to start talking to them on platforms that are not 60 Minutes and Fox News or MSNBC or any of these, I hate to say it, dying legacy media platforms, when the way to reach the growing parts of the electorate is through...
But isn't that another way of saying that Twitter is real? Well, the internet is real. Somebody just wrote a big article about this. Like, that is where reality is now, and this is perfect for the movie you're going to do. No, really, this is...
So... They're close to getting it. Here's the problem, because I remember the 1990s, and I remember they were always trying to find who's the left's version of Rush Limbaugh. How can we reach our people the way that Rush Limbaugh reaches the right.
And they never did.
Never did. Never found it. Air America died a just horrible death. No one was listening to that. No one really cared about listening to what's her name, Stephanie Rule and Mark Maron and all these other people, because they're not capable of it. That they have their own outlets, but they cannot take over the podcast sphere. Yes, it is very conservative heavy because it seems that the MAGA movement, whether it's conservatives, libertarians, or anyone who's on the non-left, likes having conversations, whether it's an echo chamber or people we disagree with, and we come to some type of consensus. And what we saw during the COVID times was you're not to have two sides to this. Jon Stewart goes on Crossfire in 2004 and rips on Paul Begala and Tucker Carlson by saying, this is a ridiculous show. What are you doing? And it wasn't so much that it's two competing ideologies that come together and then they find a common ground at the end of the show, like Hannity and Combs. It was, no, we need to have one prevailing voice and everyone else is thrown outside the Overton window. And we saw that with COVID where, what, are you a doctor? Are you a excuse me, are you a doctor? See, Dr. Fauci recommends this, and Dr. Fauci says this. And if you say, yeah, well, what about exercise and sunlight and all that kind of stuff? And you were tossed out because it was the expert class who wanted control of the narrative. But what changed was a certain South African gentleman bought this dying social media outlet a couple of years ago, and it's now retaken the form of the public square.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why so many people in the media are upset and devastated by Trump's victory. It's not so much that Harris lost, it's that they are now irrelevant. That everybody has come to the realization, and it's the final proof that they're irrelevant. And that's pretty much what you saw in that clip, is he's slowly coming to that cope that we're irrelevant. And like you said, that the right is so much better at having conversations and talking to people. That's why we dominate podcasts. Joe Rogan was once a Bernie guy, but now he's a Trump guy. He'll have conversations with whoever. He'll talk about everything. The right can have conversations because they don't hate dissent. Whereas the left, they don't talk to normal people. If you've ever been on a college campus in the last 10, 15 years, you have one myopic way of thinking, and any other thing that is bad is not okay. It's put in a corner. Oh, Trump lost. Don't worry. The therapists are coming tomorrow. They're going to comfort you. We'll have juice and cookies all over the country. Campuses did this. They took care of their schools. They canceled classes. They comfort their students because this is not real life. You're okay. They're not used to having conversations because they were never told. They're always told that other ideas are bad and unsafe. So that's
also, by the way, when you say unsafe, it's interesting you say that because they're also not used to conflict and they're not used to having their ideas challenged.
So that's why they're unable to even do well at all in this kind of mode of media, is because like Joe Rogan or Theo Vaughn, they talk about anything and everything. And people, it's everyday issues that people want to talk about, or just news or controversy, and people love it and they'll listen to it. And whereas the Democrats, is just politics all the time, and it's stupid wokeism. Wokeism is essentially an ideology that is no dissent at all. Bottom line.
It's a cult. It's a religion.
Exactly.
You have to, when you are in it, you cannot divert from it. Like I said earlier, that you can't be pro Second Amendment. You can't think that men shouldn't be playing in women's sports. That you have to abide by the tenets of their religion. Abortion is a sacrament to these people.
Modern day Scientology.
Yeah, correct. It's really no different. That's why I don't necessarily think when they say, oh, I'm an atheist, I don't believe, but you believe in everything else. So it's like you just don't believe in organized religion. You believe in whatever this cult is. And actually, that leads me to my next clip, because I think the left some of them are trying to figure it out. Bernie Sanders had a tweet the other day who said that it was the party abandoned the working class. And Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks has kind of come around saying, guys, you can't just offer these horrible candidates and expect us to rally around them. There's just so much enthusiasm. But when you have the other people in the world, the View and the Joy Reids of the world, that say that she ran a perfect campaign, and the only reason she lost is America's way more racist and sexist than we can. But there's a couple others who believe that maybe it's this woke stuff, maybe the pronouns, maybe a lot of this is going on that is causing this echo chamber, and that we think because everybody else around us votes the same, that that's the standard throughout the entire country. And that certainly wasn't the case, especially when you look at the map. So here's a CNN panel that started talking about transphobia. And you just realize a panel like this, the debate on ABC with David Muir, they're not for the average American who lives in Moline, Illinois, or Cleveland, Ohio, or anywhere else. It's for Upper East Side Manhattan socialites who walk their dogs and have somebody come over to clean the house, and then they're not married, they don't have children, they go brunching on Sundays and everything. And it's just, you realize that these are people who are stuck in their echo chamber, and they wonder why people are going to Joe Rogan and abandoning the CNNs of the world. So check this one out.
I think there are a lot of families out there who don't believe boys should play girls' sports.
They're not boys. I'm not going to listen to transphobia at this table. I am not going to listen to you call a trans girl a boy.
Are you going to allow me to finish my explanation?
When you use a word that's a slur, I'm going to interrupt. That's not how it is. They're not boys. They're not boys. They're not playing girls' softball. I'm not going to sit there and listen to that.
Let's reset for a second, because, look, this is a really heated issue, right? And Sharmichael, I know you. I know that you understand that people have different views on this. I think out of respect for Jay, like, let's try to talk about this in a way that is respectful.
Okay, so let me rephrase this, since I'm being targeted here.
I don't. You're not. Just to be clear, you are not being
but
targeted.
I am. But it's okay.
I'm specifically saying that I know that you are not intending to be transphobic.
He should know that I'm not. But he wants to sit here and bloviate.
But I want you to.
I want to give you an opportunity.
So the way regular people interpret it,
that's not regular people. That's not regular people. There's no consensus that these are actually boys. This whole thing about trans girls is a canard. We're talking about a tiny, tiny sliver of the population.
That may be the case, but my point in terms of its effectiveness,
thousands of people.
Hold on,
So I listened to this clip here, and I think about the map of the United States, of what happened in this 2024 election, and you have a blue smattering on the West Coast, and you have New York, although New York was a lot closer, and New Jersey and Illinois were a lot closer than people thought. The rest of the country is red. So when you have a panel on CNN that is talking about, no, you can't call them boys playing girls' sports because they're trans women, they're beautiful, who does this appeal to? And again, it only appeals to the people at that panel, on that table, in that round table on CNN. And this just, in my opinion, proves that I don't think the left is going to get it. I think they're going to continue doubling and tripling down on the woke stuff, instead of understanding that you got to move a little more centrist if you want to appeal to the old school working class, blue collar, lunch pail Democrat, as opposed to the ones who have the nose rings and are screaming into their pillows or yelling at the sun because the orange guy ended up being elected president again.
Well, it reminds me of what Victor Davis Hanson said after the election when he was asked, do you think they'll get it? He's like, no, because they haven't suffered enough. They're going to have to lose more and more before they realize that they're going to have to change course. And on that video, the guys right away, they're not boys. They're not boys. They're not boys. It's like, it reminds me again of college campuses. Unsafe, unsafe, unsafe. You know, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Kindergarten Cop, but it's like boys have penises and girls have vaginas. You know, and then now, but that was in 1995. That movie, we can't.
They probably had to edit it if they show it on Netflix again,
yeah,
like they did with Bill Maher, or not Bill Maher, Bill Nye the Science Guy. They actually stealth edited his old episodes when he talked about human biology, because by 2018 or 19 standards, when it came out, when they re-released it, they're like, yeah, that's going to be considered transphobic, and especially since Bill Nye is a lowercase god, a G god to them.
You know, the funny thing is, like, you know, where I first saw Bill Nye was like in high school biology, and he was like this joke of a scientist. And like, I never believed he was like what the left sees him as, a god, a serious guy. I don't know how he ever grew to be that, but like this is just who they are. They worship science. They worship everything that is so backwards and counter to what American culture is. And Bill Nye is evident. Like nobody sees Bill Nye as someone who is credible, yet they do.
Well, because they have to create their own idols. And because Bill Nye had a silly kids show in the early 1990s, and now that those 90s kids, like myself around that era, are now grown up, they have to look at who is a trustworthy voice. And it's the same as the boomers looked at Walter Cronkite. It's a new generation of these are my trusted people because this is who I grew up with, and they didn't lie to me then, so why would they lie to me now? Well, they lie. Here's the thing: is not only are they lying to you now, they lied to you back then as well, and you're just now figuring this out. You go back with Walter Cronkite and talk about the Tet Offensive and the shifting of the Vietnam War based on propaganda. Now, here's the interesting thing about propaganda, and I've discussed this on Twitter. I've discussed this on podcasts. The way to fight back against propaganda is to propagandize harder. You don't like that they're pushing lies. You don't like that they're saying that Donald Trump said there are good Nazis and that you inject bleach in your arm and that there would be a bloodbath if you don't vote for him. Here's what you do is you propagandize harder. Oh, that's not right. So I'm done taking the high road. I said this for a while now. I am done taking the high road. I did a whole podcast on this last week about why I'm not taking the high road, because not 3 years ago, they wanted people like me because I didn't take this experimental shot in my arm. They wanted me in a concentration camp. Yes, AOC, I'm going to use that term. Concentration camp, quarantine camps. They wanted me hauled off, away. And when I say they, I'm not talking about Bette Midler. I'm not talking about Bill Nye, the science guy. I'm not talking about these upper crust liberals who live on the coast. I'm talking about your average everyday American, your neighbor, your family member. Could be your daughter. It could be your mother who didn't invite you to Thanksgiving because you didn't wear a mask or you weren't vaccinated. The poll said it was half of Americans or half of Democrats polled said that, yes, we would be fine with you hauled off to a camp because you didn't get this vaccine. And not just the MMR vaccine, not a tetanus shot. I'm talking about COVID during the wake of the Omicron variant in the wintertime of 21 and into 2022. So how can I square that circle? How can I look at that and say, the average American wanted me hauled away, and if I had children, that they would want my children taken from me, and they think it's justified, while the other half of those Democrats were fine with me getting fired from my job, and that I am shut out of going to a restaurant or a music venue. That's not right, but that happened. And it didn't even happen 5 years ago. It happened 3 years ago. Just so, am I supposed to sit back and take the win graciously? No. I'm going to enjoy this. I'm enjoying this right now. I'll enjoy it next week. I'll certainly enjoy it on January 20th. And I'm just looking forward to more of this. This drink that I have right here, this is filled with liberal tears, and it's tasty. And it's just an overflowing cup of liberal tears going forward, and it will not stop, and I want more of it. That's my
it's a pattern with Democrats that they are fine with people if you don't believe them, they want them. I remember after the assassination attempt, Scott Rasmussen actually asked the question, do you think the country would be better off if Trump was dead? And among Democrats, 33% said yes, and then the rest of them said, a quarter of them said no, and then a third of them said no, and a third of them said I don't know. So essentially,
not sure. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, in other words, you're not sure because you're too afraid to let us know that you'd rather have him dead. But the truth is, probably 2/3 of Democrats would love it if he's dead. And that's the same thing with your vaccine there, is that if you don't get the vaccine, I need you in a concentration camp because I don't feel safe. You're not abiding by the societal rules, blah, 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 blah. In other words, if you dissent, it's time for you to be punished.
I keep thinking about it, and when I see, well, and here's the other freak out is I know people who are going on and on talking about how Project 2025 is going to, it's going to bust through the doors of interracial couples and jail you for marrying outside of your race, or if you're gay or trans, they're going to put electrodes on your genitals and try to convert you into being straight. Like, where are you reading this? Well, I've read Project 2020. No, you didn't. Project 2025 was over 900 pages. You didn't read one friggin' page. I'm trying not to curse today, but you didn't read one page of it. You saw Occupy Democrats on your Facebook page put a little meme that says, Project 2025 is going to force women who get abortions, they're going to put the baby back in and make you forced to give. None of that is true. This hysteria that is going on. And I mean, I love it because none of it's true. And here's the other thing. Donald Trump, I could be wrong. We may have talked about this, but he was president at one time, and none of that happened before.
Right.
So it seems to me that you Democrats are projecting what you wanted to do to us. It's all projection. Oh, they're trying to. Donald Trump says he's going to jail his political opponents, except that's what you did because of people who were peacefully protesting 4 Januaries ago at the Capitol, or Douglas Mackey, who had a meme, or those who are committing FACE Act violations by the grave sin and crime of praying in front of a Planned Parenthood. Yeah, I'm sorry. I am not going to take the high road here anymore. I'm doing the Eric Holder, when they go low, we kick them. That's what I'm doing right now. This is just, and I sound so emotional about this, but it's a white pill for me. And you start to realize who your friends are, and that if you do have Democrat friends and you are a Republican, you are a MAGA guy, and people can put aside politics. The problem is the left now is not putting aside politics. That is their religion. And when I've insulted their religion, they want nothing to do with that. So I've been seeing my friend group just dropping the people who I would have a normal conversation with 9 years ago about anything. They don't want to talk to me anymore. And you know what? Maybe it's this is part of that national divorce we've been hearing about for the last couple of years.
Well, I know I'm friends with people who were God honest serious, had their bags packed. If Trump lost, they were going to leave the country because of January 6th. That they were putting to jail Trump supporters, and they were afraid that if Trump lost, that they would somehow, some way be put in jail because the administration or the regime was jailing Trump supporters. Now, not only is that cruel, but I mean, a lot of this liberal reaction is bordering on mental illness too, because right after Trump won, a lot of people were tweeting out in fun, oh, by the way, Project 2025 is real and we're going to enact it. They were trolling the left. Well, there's like 5, 6 different videos of different women saying, see, we told you. They're now telling us that it's real and you didn't believe us. I mean, like, okay, chill. They're trolling you, but they can't see it. They're so jacked up with it, anxiety right now. And then the 4B movement, where now half the women in the world have decided they're not going to have sex with men anymore because they elected Donald Trump. I think I would suggest they go to a therapist, but I'm pretty sure these therapists are probably just as bad as them.
Yeah, the therapists need their own therapists. And by the way, with projection, this was a huge story that came out. We're recording this over the weekend. This came out late Friday from the Daily Wire. It says exclusive. Internal messages obtained by the Daily Wire showed a FEMA official ordered relief workers in Florida not to help houses with Trump signs. Whistleblowers say that relief workers were told it was best practice to pass over houses advertising Trump. The workers would enter the system that they made no contact with the residents, blaming the directive. Trump signed no contact per leadership. And again, this is all stuff that they project onto us, that they think that we are going to abandon Americans because they're Democrats. Oh, you didn't vote the right way? Except that's what you did. You did this in Florida. And I guarantee you they did this in North Carolina as well, with FEMA turning away everyday Americans who wanted to help their fellow countrymen. And that was going on. Then you have East Palestine, Ohio, nearly 2 years ago, that the federal government slow walk the response to that. And it took Donald Trump ordering Big Macs for everybody at that local McDonald's there for Pete Buttigieg to wear his hard hat and finally come out to East Palestine. That they couldn't care less about everyday Americans. Yet, again, it's more projection. Donald Trump doesn't care about, except you've already proven that to be the case right now. And sorry, you people are just going to have to get what you deserve. You're going to have to get it, and you're going to get it good and hard.
The problem the Democrats had ultimately is they can say, oh, well, Trump doesn't do this with voters and everything. But Trump actually ran a very inspiring campaign. He inspired voters. He inspired everybody around him. I mean, you heard about the McDonald's thing for a week. And when he was a garbage man for a day, after that, people were going to his rally dressed as garbage men. He inspired people during a time in which people needed inspiration. It's very simple. That's why you lost. We were down and we needed a pick-me-up, and you guys were just kicking us while we were down. And here came Trump saying, I got you. Follow me.
It's terrific. It's great to see. Now, I guess the last question I'll ask before we wrap up the podcast here is, will the Democrats learn? I mean, you talk about, what is it, the 6-year swing, that every few years the pendulum is going to swing back, and eventually there's going to be a repudiation of the GOP, of the MAGA movement, whatever. We all know that that's what's going to happen. It happens. People get bored. They want something else. They're interested in something else. It's just right now the pendulum is way over to the right, and it seems to be probably going to be there for a couple of years. Do they figure something out? The Democrats figure something out with a more populist candidate who's in the hopper for them, who's on the bench to really turn some eyes and some ears? Or are we going to continue on and then very well could see President J.D. Vance going forward, and that this turns into a Ronald Reagan situation where it very well could, Reaganomics could have very well continued throughout the 1990s?
Well, I don't think they'll figure it out. I do think their best hope is Josh Shapiro. He's their most talented bench guy. But
he's like Jewish Obama for people who don't really know much about him. He has the cadence of Obama, but he's a Jewish man and has that whole sense of self-worth.
Yeah, so with J.D. Vance, the one thing I would warn is that he's the sitting VP. And so historically, that is been uphill for sitting VPs that run for president. I would add a caveat to that, though, and that sitting VPs who run for POTUS as the sitting vice president during administrations that are popular, so Martin Van Buren under the Jackson administration, Nixon under Eisenhower, Bush under Reagan, Gore under Clinton, 3 of the 4 of those won the popular vote, and Nixon made it very close. Obviously, Gore lost. But when you're under a popular outgoing administration as a sitting VP, you are highly competitive. That's why it's very important that the Republicans deliver on Trump's mandate of the economy, immigration, inflation, ending the wars. If they do that and they make the voters happy, Trump will be a popular outgoing president, and J.D. Vance has a shot. If not, whoever is that nominee, if Trump's down in 45%, it's just not going to happen. But that's why right now we need to focus on delivering for the voters, because if you do that, everything else will take care of itself.
Actually, I do have one more question. And we talked about this, and I think about it all the time. When you started noticing a year ago that the neocons were endorsing Trump, and is this a way that they look, Trump only has 4 more years. Let's get MAGA over with, and then we can go back to the good old days of warmongering neocons, that the Steve Scalises, the Mike Pompeos, that they're just kind of waiting in the weeds. Let's just wait it out a little bit, and then we'll go back to full-on pro-Ukraine, pro-war, pro-this, pro-that. Do you think that's going to be the case, or is this administration, is the cabinet that Trump is filling out, are going to really truly drain the swamp, unlike the first time?
The neocons are not going to go silently into the good night. I think Haley runs in 2028, and the question is, how wide of a lane does she have? Will there be J.D. Vance Ron DeSantis and Vivek Ramaswamy sucking up all those votes, giving her a nice wide lane? Or does Trump endorse J.D. Vance and it's just her and Vance going at it, in which case she would have no chance? That's the real question for the nomination, is that do we consolidate behind MAGA, ending neoconservatism in 2028? But they're not going to go away. They're going to be much quieter because Trump won the popular vote and he has a mandate. And it's not this guy who sneaked in and backed into the door in 2016. He's popular now. He's wanted by the voters. They're going to still be there, but they're going to be much more quiet.
Yeah, and any mistakes he's made of John Bolton and others, I'm sure have been cleaned up, and we're not going to see John Bolton and the walrus mustache anymore. Well, hey, David, thank you so much once again for being back on the podcast. Actually, let me pull up your Twitter account. You also have your own show now. I noticed you've been doing more podcasting yourself. Promote it if you can.
Yeah, so I normally go live every Saturday night at midnight, so technically Sunday morning. But I'm off this week because of the election. I went live earlier this week to make up for that. But usually every Saturday night at midnight, I just do politics and election analysis and a little bit of history. And sometimes right now it's been politics. But I'm only 19 episodes in, but I've been getting a pretty good following. So come check it out.
Yeah, excellent. And if you folks didn't see, it is David Chapman 141 over on Twitter, and does a great job over there, and buy his book, The Forgotten Nine, over on Amazon. Well, David, thank you so much for joining the podcast once again, and I'm sure we'll be in contact because you really are like the first person I thought of when I saw that Trump not only had a shot, but then won. And I'm like, well, I got to find a way to get David on the podcast as soon as I can. And this is about as soon as I could. So thanks again for being on.
Thank you.
And thank you, folks, for listening to the Check Your Brain podcast for this week. I'll be back with you with another free podcast coming up next Wednesday. But if you want more content from me, go over to Patreon at patreon.com/Tony Mazur, TonyMazur. Thank you, everybody. And see you next week. Bye, everyone.